in receiving goods, consumer goods, etc. As to exports, the window for potash transportation, whose world markets need this, have also been corrected. Forest companies have had to reduce their productions, and a number carry refrigerated perishable goods of high value, such as fresh pork, and these were lost before they were able to reach markets.
It is estimated that the 13-day disruption affected the movement of roughly $10 billion of goods. Supply chains involve complex logistics and are not designed to pivot on a dime. Impacts during times of disruption are unavoidable, but transparent, timely communication can be a powerful antidote to uncertainty, especially in circumstances where no one knows how long the disruption will last. During the disruption, while respecting the integrity of the collective bargaining process that Labour Canada oversaw, Transport Canada created a focal point for information exchange to help supply chain users and operators alike develop a common operating picture. Leading up to and during the disruption, Transport Canada hosted daily virtual meetings with anywhere from 50 to over 100 participants, including major shippers and retailers, port authorities, railways, and off-dock logistics providers. These supply chain participants came together to hear operational updates from different modes of the supply chain. Les réunions ont également servi de tribune à Travail
Meetings
Canada.
have also served as a place where Canada can continue with the negotiations, and this process was strictly between the employees and employers and their representatives. The summons as well has allowed the industry to understand the different issues, but rather to see the integral elements of a larger ensemble. This was key for restarting the system. Transport Canada has also maintained communication with the main operators and the main shippers on a bilateral basis, recognizing the delicate commercial nature of some of these exchanges.
Real-time operational information from supply chain participants, combined with Transport Canada's in-house analytical capacity, helped shape a complete and accurate picture for ministers and cabinet. Following the disruption, it took supply chains approximately 4 to 6 weeks to recover. In October, the Minister of Labour initiated a process under Section 106 of the Canada Labour Code to examine the structural issues underlying that disruption, as well as similar disputes at other ports in Canada in the past. This work remains with Labour Canada and is ongoing. In the broader context, the events and shocks to our supply chains over the last few years, from a global pandemic to natural disasters to geopolitical forces, have highlighted a need for government leadership to ensure efficient, fluid, resilient, and reliable supply chains. Budget 2023 has laid the groundwork to establish a national supply chain office to work with industry, labor, Indigenous groups, and other orders of government to increase the fluidity, efficiency, resilience, and reliability of our supply chains. And Madam Chair, I'll conclude my remarks there.
Mr. Dick, we reduce it to 5 minutes each in order to ensure that we can get to our next panel. Mr. Seebeck for 5 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. When I take a look at the Port of Vancouver, the World Bank ranks the Port of Vancouver as the third worst port in the world for efficiency and performance, 368th out of 370. And when we look at, and when I've read that report, that does not include labor disruptions. Does anyone on the panel think that having a 13-day strike or strikes of similar duration, is that going to improve the ranking of the Port of Vancouver in its current position as the third worst port in the world?
So my understanding of the World Bank rating is that it includes a number of different factors. As you noted, the labor dispute was not part of those. So as far as I'm aware, unless the methodology actually includes labor disputes, it would not necessarily have an impact on the ranking, except to the fact that you would see the downstream impacts from the labor dispute impact the efficiency of the flow of cargo through the port.
So would you agree with me that labor disruptions at the Port of Vancouver would probably affect, and this ranking is based on efficiency and performance, and so would you agree with me that a 13-day strike would have a negative effect on the efficiency and performance of the port?
I think that I can't speak, as I said, to the methodology for the World Bank report. I would say that the economic evidence demonstrated that the labor disruption disrupted the flow of cargo through the port, and that it took a number of weeks post the end of the labor disruption to clear out that backlog with correspondent impacts on the movement of cargo and the efficiency of the movement of cargo through the port. So during the supply chain, during the disruption, and then the catch-up period thereafter.
Do we have an estimate on what the actual economic impact of the strike was? I'm thinking of Mr. D. You are, I guess, the Economist economic analysis. I know I've certainly seen a number somewhere in the range of $10 billion, but does the government have an actual estimate? The Greater Vancouver Board of Trade said about $10.7 billion. do you have an impact, or did the government do an assessment of what that impact was?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Just maybe to provide a bit more of the context before we provide a bit more numbers. What is important to understand is that, we are a small trading nation. So in that regards, everything that is affecting the fluidity of the movement of the merchandise on the export and the import is affecting Canadian businesses, is affecting Canadian communities, and it may also impact also on the reputational aspect of the
Sure,
Canada as a trading nation.
I will get to that, but I have very limited time, 5 minutes. Have you done an estimate of what the economic impact of the strike at the Port of Vancouver, and if so, what was that dollar figure?
Yes, we do. And again, there's three ways to look at that. You mentioned some numbers that are more related to the shipment that have been affected, and it's in the order of magnitude between 10 to 13 billion of the value of the shipment that has been affected due to the strike. But in terms of the net economic impact, it's going to be between 750 to $1 billion of dollar associated in terms of net economic loss associated with the 13 days strike at the port.
And if you in that analysis, for example, I know there's a business in my riding. They install vents in barns for ventilation, for chicken barns, etc. They weren't able to get their product on time, which meant their workers had to work overtime. Does that ever get factored into this? The economic loss of that business, they have to work overtime, but may not be able to charge for that overtime. Does the analysis go into that?
The estimate, we're doing two things, roughly speaking. We have tools, analytical tools and model that will allow us to assess the macroeconomic and the sectoral impact. But we're also validating that with the industry to make sure that, these numbers are reflecting the reality of the industry. So the point that you're raising is factored in terms of, the net economic loss, which mean that if some Canadian business are losing production, or if they have to increase or the cost increase in order to either move their commodity or their products to their client, this is factored into the analytics that we're doing.
So is there a document that you have?
Mr.
I just want to see if you have this document internally that you prepared, could you provide that document to the committee? Because 5 minutes isn't enough time to go into it.
Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Seebeck. On to Mr. Sidu, please.
Well, thank you. Thanks to our witnesses for being here today. We all know that Canada's ports play a significant role in the lives of Canadians as they handle more than 90% of Canada's marine traffic. More than 343 million tons of cargo were shipped through our ports in 2021 alone, and it's our Canada's port authorities, or CPAs, that advance the growth and prosperity of the Canadian economy by managing these key marine infrastructure and services. So earlier this week, I had the pleasure to address the Canadian Association of Importers and Exporters, and we heard directly from them the value that the ports add in terms of getting their products to market around the world, and also the economic value in creating jobs right here in Canada. I'd like to hear more from the witnesses here. If you can share with our committee how Bill C33 would optimize traffic management at Canada's port authorities and the benefits that could be realized through this important legislation.
So Bill C33 proposes a number of legislative amendments, particularly related to vessel traffic management. So providing a greater capacity for ports to actively manage vessel traffic in and out of the ports, to help improve the fluidity of the supply chain in terms of the presence of vessels to be unloaded and to load cargo. It also provides a framework for ports to collect certain types of data from port users to help support the active traffic management. So that also is an important input in terms of providing line of sight into when vessels need to be at port, and what cargo they're moving, and how long they can be expected to remain in port.
Thank you for that. And as part of the study, we're also looking at port-related innovation. that could help with efficiencies and performance. But based on your expertise, I'm wondering if there's other ports here in Canada or across the world that we can look to and learn from in terms of innovation.
I would say that there are a number of ports worldwide that have demonstrated incredible amounts of innovation in respect of things like traffic management, the use of different data and tools to improve the flow of cargo through their ports. Some of their operating contexts are a bit different from those in Canada, which I think has an impact on the types of innovation that can be applied in a certain circumstance. But we have seen a number of ports who are leveraging data, and my colleague actually may be able to speak to some of those, particularly in Europe and some in the United States, where they are leveraging data quite effectively to be able to work with terminal operators, other port users, shippers, and carriers to support supply chain management.
Yes, when you look at the best practices internationally, you have a few areas in the world where the port seems to be a bit more advanced in terms of the way to manage logistic, in terms of digitalization activity or automatization, or the way to plan and coordinate activities a bit more in an integrated way with their user and their client. And when you look at the best practices, Singapore is probably one of the port that has been identified, but a different context, as my colleague mentioned. So it's a single port and also a state element. So the context is very different. But there are also other ports in Europe. Rotterdam. You have 3 ports in France that have developed a partnership in order to bring a bit more this notion that they want to bring a bit more resiliency in terms of the capacity of the different ports in Paris, Rouen, and Amber to basically serve and ensure a bit more resiliency in the way to serve their client. In North America, there are different ports that are moving forward, but I would say that generally speaking, North America, most of the ports are still at the same level in terms of the digitalization or the logistic capacity. So globally, we're probably lagging a little bit compared to some big European port or Asian port on that regards.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry your time is up. On to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci à l'ensemble
Thank you,
des
Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. We apologize if we might have to interrupt this for an eventual vote. In a brief in 2018 that was sent to the Government of Canada on the modernization of ports, apparently the Canadian Association of Port Authorities had made a number of recommendations to Transport Canada. It wanted to further collaborate with Canadian port authorities, and there would be an advisory group that would put forward a future visions to identify future innovations in logistics, transportation, trade diversification, and to target new needs and trends. Such a committee this kind of committee been created.
So we haven't formalized, I would say, a committee in that regard. However, the department meets very regularly with the Association of Canadian Port Authorities and the individual CPAs on a number of initiatives that are being undertaken through Transport Canada. We are also actually in the process of establishing a regularized table to talk about kind of the whole range of issues that are impacting ports within the Transport Canada purview. So we'll be establishing those regular meetings on an ongoing basis. There are different tables as well that port authorities do participate in individually or as part through their association that provide various inputs into kind of the initiatives through Transport Canada. And I know that my colleague, Mr. Dick here, will be looking at how to ensure that the inputs of Canadian port authorities are taken into account in terms of the solutions and the priorities that form the work of the supply chain office.
Donc là, vous me dites le groupe n'a pas été mis
So
sur pied.
you're indicating that the group was not established, but in terms of perhaps other structures or work group, and I don't quite know what their procedure would be, but is research underway or any study that has been conducted in order to identify the challenges and the opportunities of Canadian ports over the next 10 years?
Bien sûr que ce mémoire-là, il était il y a
And
5
of
ans.
course, this was 5 years ago that the study was submitted, so I understand that it was focused on realities of 5 years ago.
So right now we are, and this was announced in the course of Bill C-33, that we are undertaking work regarding complementarity of ports. So that will be, that work is underway, and that will be looking at things that it will include work around kind of the opportunities and challenges and risks and opportunities associated with collaboration.
Et aussi, dans ce même mémoire, les administrations
And in the
portuaires
same submission, the Canadian Port Authority is also committed to striking a work group that would focus on a common technological development aimed at improving the efficiency of the chains, the supply chains, including Transport Canada. I'll ask the same question, although it was not your initiatives. Has this group been put in place since there was issue of including it? To your knowledge, was this group created?
Interrupt. The bells have started ringing. Do I have unanimous consent to continue on until 10 minutes prior to the vote? All right. Okay. Thank you. We will continue. Apologies for the interruption.
Moi, ça va, là, mais...
Mr. Cannings, I'm sorry, was there an issue? We're still on with Mr. Savard Tremblay. Yeah.
No, I was just commenting on the vote situation.
Okay.
But-
Mr. Trump, please.
Ma question est posée de...
I have asked my question.
My colleagues may say more, but I'd simply say we are trying to and are engaged regularly with the port authorities at multiple levels. There is a lot of innovation, including digital initiatives, going on at the various Canadian port authorities. They have different capacities, understandably owing to their size. We are encouraging them to work together. I met with them, in fact, with my colleagues yesterday. And rather than a working group, we're trying to just make that ongoing work that we do with them. They are an integral part of this supply chain system.
Mais le groupe qui était un engagement de 2018 a
But
été
the
créé.
group was to be created under a 2018 commitment, has not been put in place
Ou soit que le Transport Canada soit dedans.
because apparently there was an issue that Transport Canada could be part of this group, which was supposed to be put in place.
Moi non plus, donc il y a pas eu, mais il y a eu des...
I am not aware of this either. But yes, there have been regional initiatives put in place. The Port of Montreal, the Port of Trois-Rivières, as well as the Port of Quebec City came together and established a strategic plan to move forward, as you were mentioning, to study specifically logistics and innovation. Was anything digital established? Could we perhaps get a sense of what the projects might be? Their projects regarding the actual ports? Well, that was my first question. Is there a kind of digital roadmap? Has that been established, to your knowledge? Is there a plan in place, in other words? From what I understand, is that each port does its own.
They're often referred to as port community systems. So the Port de Montréal has worked with its stakeholder community that works in the port. Vancouver has done the same, and there are initiatives that I'm familiar with in Halifax and Prince Rupert as well. I can't speak to all of them, but those ports have certainly done their own things. It's with each of their stakeholder communities that operate in that port as opposed to a national platform.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cannings for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here today. And I guess I want to start with this. You know, there always seems to be the narrative when there's a labor disruption, as there was in this case. We had the unions put forward a notice back in 2022 that they wanted to start negotiating. That negotiation started in February, went on into June. They had a strike mandate, and then the strike happened. And I just want to, I guess, make the point that when strikes happen, it's not just the union making that decision. It's management, it's the port in this case, deciding that they would rather go ahead with the strike than give in more to the union. So it's got two sides to it. It's not just a labor disruption is not just the choice of labor. And so one thing I'd like to know is how does the Port of Vancouver stack up to other major ports in Europe, say, or wherever, in terms of labor disruptions? How often do they happen? Is it some characteristic of the Vancouver port, or does it seem to be part of the normal state of affairs in the world?
Yeah, I'll turn to my colleague. I think one thing I just wanted to observe as well is that the Port of Vancouver, the strike was not the Port of Vancouver strike. In fact, it was the West Coast owing to the structure, and I'll turn to my colleague on that. There is the slightly different structures in different ports in terms of who is the employer and how negotiations occur. I think a better comparison that I'm more familiar with would be the United States ports. I'm not in a position to speak to a European comparison today, but Sonia?
So in respect of the way that labor relations work at the ports, the Port Authority, the Canadian, like the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority or the Prince Rupert Port Authority, is not actually the negotiating body with the ILWU. And they aren't actually the employer in this situation. It is the BC Maritime Employers Association, and they represent the private sector businesses, basically, that are tenants of the various ports. So those are kind of further removed from that. The Port Authority basically acts as the landlord for those tenants agreements, so the relationship is a bit different. In terms of comparabilities, as my colleague mentioned, the United States would probably be more comparable, and we certainly have seen over the past number of years some labor disruptions in American ports that have happened. It's hard to do the exact international comparison because sometimes the context is very difficult.
Another issue I'd like to bring up is Bill C-58, which is before the House now. It's the anti-scab legislation that would forbid the use of replacement workers in federally regulated industries like ports. And you hear commentary on both sides of whether this would be good or bad. Obviously, the NDP believes it's an essential thing and would actually shorten labor disputes, because if you allow replacement workers, things drag on, get very nasty, etc. So I'm just wondering if you can comment on if there's any examples out there about, I don't know if other jurisdictions have this kind of legislation, but what you think would be the effect on a labor dispute in a port with that legislation in place?
I think in terms of that comparative analysis, that would be best directed towards colleagues from Labour Canada. I'm not familiar with that. Just as a practical matter, 7,200 longshoremen were on strike. There would be limited management capacity to replace that.
Well, I guess maybe getting back to how often this happens, do you know when the last labor disruption in Vancouver port was?
I did know that. I don't remember it offhand. It was. There've been, but
It's been so long.
The impact. Businesses begin to make adjustment when they anticipate that there could be uncertainty. They don't necessarily wait for the disruption. So there have been impacts as people seek to mitigate risks when they anticipate that there is a vulnerability and there's uncertainty as to the outcome. And that's true. I would submit of any bargaining situation. The last actual strike, I think, was some time ago. I don't recall precisely.
Thank you
by-
very much.
Okay.
Mr. General for 4 minutes, please.
4 minutes, Judy. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for joining us here today. Two quick items just want to follow up on. My colleague started by asking for an economic impact assessment document, just getting on record that you guys will be able to provide that document to the committee. Heads are nodding, so I'll take that as yes. And then secondly, when discussion around Bill C-33, also at the beginning of this committee, just want to follow up on some of the comments made there. I guess essentially the bulk exporters at the port, do they support this active vessel management process being proposed by the Port of Vancouver?
I would say that there is a lot of discussion in respect of active vessel traffic management. Certainly, industry is participating in that engagement. They were part of a public engagement process, and I believe that the Port of Vancouver, the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority is still engaging with the various entities, including shippers, including the...
So it's not necessarily a yes that they support it.
I would say that they support certain aspects of it. They may have
They still have issues
differences
with-
of opinion in terms of how certain aspects of vessel traffic management play out.
Okay. I'd like to know more about what those certain aspects are, but I only have 2 minutes left. So perhaps provide maybe a little bit more of that in writing, or an expanded answer perhaps would be helpful. Moving on to the dollar amounts that were suggested. So on shipment, up to about 13 billion was impacted, and then a net economic loss about 1 billion. The high end was impacted. But just going off the comments that Mr. Dick just indicated, that businesses often make adjustments when they sense uncertainty. Looking back at the timeline, the collective agreement expired in March 31st, 2022. I would suggest that is some uncertainty with businesses. I hope that you would agree with that. So does your economic assessment take into account the comment that Mr. Dick just made?
The short answer is at least partly. We are engaged again with the, it's not just a pure data model-based, assessment we're doing. We are talking almost on a daily basis with the sector to get an appreciation about, what they're doing in preparation of a potential, labor dispute. And we factor that in our analysis when we know that when they are starting to
But
change.
that 13 billion number, though, just to
The
say
13
shipment,
billion is clearly capturing the
the
this
13
element.
days
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you
yeah,
indicated.
yeah,
So it wouldn't go back to
No.
So you would agree that it was the potential to be a lot more impactful.
The potential
date that it
is a
expired.
bit more than, probably a bit more than that, but you have to be cognizant that, it's tough for the businesses also to change their route, because, they are shipped.
But they could essentially change the route as of March 31st and say,
Yeah.
we're not going to even bother getting into this because it creates some uncertainty.
Yeah.
Agree, right?
may.
Okay, so the last 30 seconds I have, some of the lingering impacts to this day, can you give us a sense of what those might be? Not all at once, but everybody for sure is allowed.
Listen, people would like more predictability and more stability and more certainty. There is concern from businesses in Canada that this affects their reliability, reputation abroad, and concern from trading partners who perhaps are less familiar with the Canadian labor, the labor context.
To say there are lingering impacts. You'd agree?
Sure, there are reputational impacts.
Thank you very much. Under Mr. Miao for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to witnesses for being here today. I understand in your remark you mentioned that on the import side, Canadian manufacturers could not get the materials needed to continue their production, which caused a cascading effect on cross-border industry like auto sector. And to what degree does this strike have an impact on both transportation sector and on the auto industry in Canada?
Madam Chair. Thanks for the question. You have to understand that the way the Western port serve, yes, BC, the Canadian economy, but also the U.S. economy. So when you look just on the container side, the movement is about 40% for BC, about 30% of everything that is moved through container at the port is for the rest of Canada, and another 30% is going to the U.S., and mainly the Midwest, where basically, the manufacturing sector and the auto sector is. So that's an important piece of context. So, this strike is not just affecting a region, it affects the economy and affect the North American market in that regard. In terms of the areas that have been affected, the auto sector have clearly been an area affected. We were monitoring the situation with Canadian, but also U.S. company to get a sense. Usually they have a bit of an inventory that allow them to basically continue the full production. And they are starting to feel really the impact, I would say, after 5 to 7 days. But within a week of disruption, they can manage that without having too many impact in terms of the production side. But given the length of this one, clearly there have been some realignment of the production in Canadian and the U.S. auto sector associated with that.
And would you say that the backlog created has been fully addressed right after the strike ends?
Usually the backlog, the rule that, while we're working with the industry, the rule that they are using is it takes between 3 to 5 times the amount of the day lost of strike. And it differ for the different sectors. So probably, the rule of thumb, when you look at that, it may take up to a month or two, depending on the sector and the region, to fully recover from a 13-day strike.
And would you say businesses were deferred to other ports because of what Port of Vancouver is experiencing? Businesses went to port in Seattle or Portland down south?
If I may, there are a couple of elements to that. One is, as my colleagues have previously noted, these supply chains are not necessarily very agile, right? So it does take time and lead time to adjust. The other factor was that there was reported to be tremendous solidarity with unions up and down the coast, which we've seen in other global disruptions, where cargo that was overtly diverted from the West Coast ports of Canada was threatened to have faced refusal to move that by unions on the West Coast or other unionized ports in the United States. So that entailed a risk as well to shippers who couldn't divert with a certain outcome that their cargo would move.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Miao. On to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for a minute and a half.
Alors, rapidement, c'est bon?
Very quickly. As Transport Canada intends to put in place access to data to all port authorities as well as to other parties in the supply chain as was recommended.
Oui, à l'intérieur de l'initiative que mon collègue Robert...
Yes, as part of the initiatives that my colleague Robert will be overseeing, we are working with the sector in order to improve the accessibility and sharing to and accessibility to information, to facilitate operational decisions, but we're also aiming to improve the decision-making process and the planning process, as well as investments in order to boost the capacity and resilience of the sector. This work began a number of years back with a number of ports already. And we are now scaling this work up to a greater level. No doubt this will take place in the next bit. I'd like to thank you very much. I only have 30 seconds left. My last question. Is there a strategy at Transport Canada in order to integrate new technologies such as the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, self-driving vehicles, etc., automation of terminal facilities as part of port infrastructures?
That's absolutely the sort of thing we are working with the port authorities on and encouraging them to do within the port ecosystems. And very rapidly, the last major disruption at the Port of Vancouver was in 1969.
Thank you. Mr. Cannings for 1.5 minutes.
Well, thank you for providing that data. I was going to do that myself, but I just wanted to make the point that this isn't a continual thing in the Port of Vancouver per se. It happens in ports all over the world. And I guess I also wanted to just bring up that word that you talked about, the impact that this had between labor disruptions. There were impacts. I mean, to me, that sounds like a negative thing, but I assume you were talking about adjustments the employers were making to labor situations, whether it's increase in pay or better working conditions. Is that what, those would have an impact on the employer? They would have obviously beneficial impacts on the workers. Is that what you were implying?
In terms of ongoing impacts, I was speaking of the reputations, and I think the issue from the vantage point of Canada's trading and business partners has been all disruptions to our supply chains, not just labor disruptions. Mm-hmm. And the reality is we've had blockades and the atmospheric river and wildfires and a series of other shocks to our supply chains that have affected the reliability of that flow of goods.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nick. We now have to go for a vote, so I want to thank the witnesses very much for being here, and our other panel of witnesses will come to the table. So I will suspend until following the vote. Yes, yes, I'm sorry. Mr. Savard Tremblay?
Oui, excusez-moi, Madame la Présidente, juste
Yes,
maintenant.
Madam Chair. Could you please indicate what the procedure will be following the motion that I have tabled, which was adopted at the last session? That is, the committee would be mandated to move forward. What is the procedure? Will we have a draft letter? Can we expect that shortly? What would be the procedure?
Donc, les analystes ont commencé déjà à rédiger une lettre dès que c'est...
Analysts have already started drafting a letter. As soon as it is translated, the committee can see the letter.
Yeah, donc, ça va venir en comité.
So it is expected to come before the committee. May I make a suggestion? So to overly debate the content of the letter, there are a number of facts that will be listed in the motion. That's correct, Mr. Savard Tremblay.
So before we get to the witnesses, I want to put it out there that I have to leave and some of our members have to leave because we have QP prep at 1. So we'll have to get out of here.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gee and Mr. Chan. Whoever wants to start, you have the floor for the moment.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning, honorable members. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce is the country's largest business association with an active network of over 400 chambers of commerce and boards of trade representing nearly 200,000 businesses of all sizes in all sectors and regions of our country. I'm joined today by my colleague Pascal Chan, Senior Director, Transportation Infrastructure and Construction. As a trading nation, our trade infrastructure matters more to Canada than many other countries around the world. In fact, 2 of every $3 that Canada makes rely on moving goods. This is significantly higher than the OECD average of just over 50%. When Canadian businesses can't import or export goods reliably, we undermine our ability to grow our economy.
Hold for a minute. Do I have unanimous consent to continue in allowing the witnesses to speak? Do I have unanimous consent? Yes, till their appropriate time. Okay, thank you. My apologies. Got it down? Okay.
Our West Coast is Canada's largest gateway to the world, handling over $800 million worth of cargo, from agri-foods and potash to critical minerals and household necessities every single day. That accounts for a quarter of Canada's total trade. This summer, we saw over 35 days of uncertainty and disruptions to our West Coast gateways, including Vancouver, Vancouver Island, Prince Rupert, that caused major delays for Canadian business in virtually every sector across the country. I'll repeat that, 25% of our total trade stopped. That meant Canadian Potash had to cut production and sales during the strike, causing those who rely on Canadians for fertilizer had to look elsewhere to ensure they continue to grow crops. This meant that businesses looking for replacement parts to fix machinery were delayed, causing production to slow or stop. It meant fruits and vegetables that we bring to Canada were left to rot in containers as opposed to on shelves for consumers to enjoy. Plain and simple, it meant goods were going to become more expensive and fuel inflation. I'll stress to the committee that the damage from a strike does not simply take place in the days workers are picketing. Businesses need certainty. They need to know that if they are importing or exporting goods, that they will get where they need to go when they need to be there. If not, suppliers will go elsewhere, and it's not guaranteed that it'll come back. When looking at Canada's record, many of our trading partners are beginning to question if Canada can reliably get goods to market. We saw this shortly after the West Coast port strike with the St. Lawrence Seaway and with the uncertainty that is looming at the Port of Montreal. I must state that the Canadian Chamber respects the right to collective bargaining. We believe sincerely that the best deals are reached at the table, but when negotiations break down and meaningful bargaining is no longer possible, the Canadian business community expects the government to show leadership and act in the best interest of the country. The Canadian Chamber called on the government to use the tools it currently has in its toolbox to prevent a strike and then solve it. The Canadian Chamber, we applaud the Minister of Labour for directing the senior mediator to recommend terms for settlement to reach a fair deal. But unfortunately, we did not see that action until nearly 2 weeks into the port strike, when significant damage to the Canadian economy and reputation had already taken place, and that dragged on for further weeks while the union failed to ratify the agreement. The review initiated by the Minister of Labour under Section 106 of the Canadian Labour Code is a key opportunity to do this, to equip the government with more tools and to be able to avoid labour disruption while protecting public interests. We need to make sure the government has the ability to force the two sides together in form of binding resolution. We can't have the government waiting on the sidelines for 2 weeks before action is taken. Canada's supply chains are only as strong as their weakest link. Government can't solve all of our supply chain issues, but it must look to enable policies that will enable trade and strengthen our supply chains. Less than a month ago, the Minister of Labour told Canadians that our credibility as a trading nation depends on stable operations of our supply chains. We must do everything we can to preserve that stability. We couldn't agree more. However, the introduction of Bill C-58, which aims to prohibit the use of replacement workers during strikes, suggests that the government actually wants to move away from preserving stability. It is in fact doubling down on Canada being seen as an unreliable trading partner. We need our leaders to engage in an honest dialogue that will provide our government the tools it needs to address our labor challenges, while allowing employers and employees to bargain the way they should. For the sake of our economy, I would urge all parties to vote against this legislation. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And on to Mr. McKenzie from Canpotex Limited. Mr. McKenzie is the President and Chief Executive Officer. Please welcome, sir. Apologies for the delay.
No worries, and thank you very much. Good morning from Saskatoon here. Good afternoon in Ottawa. Thank you for inviting Canpotex to appear today. As you mentioned, I'm Gord McKenzie, President and CEO of Canpotex, one of the world's largest suppliers of potash based right here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Each year, we market and deliver approximately 13 million metric tons of Canadian potash to 40 overseas countries on behalf of our two shareholders, the Mosaic Company and Nutrien. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss the impacts of the Port of Vancouver strike. In short, the strike significantly impacted Canadian potash. Approximately 500,000 metric tons of planned potash shipments from the Port of Vancouver were diverted or delayed, and I can tell you these shipments will not be made up by the end of 2023. And very importantly, it's hurt Canada's overall reputation as a reliable and stable trading partner. As you would know, the Port of Vancouver is the most important outlet for potash exports. Approximately 70% of Canpotex potash is handled by our terminal, Neptune Bulk Terminals in North Vancouver.
And today, Neptune is the largest potash handling facility in the world, and we've invested heavily in making it the most cost-effective and efficient terminal. The impacts began well in advance of the strike action. On June 28th, railroads stopped launching our trains in Saskatchewan in anticipation of this strike. The backlogs were not cleared until at least the very end of August. There was little capacity elsewhere in Canada to divert these shipments. We'd already been maximizing our third-party terminal at the Port of Saint John and through the Port of Thunder Bay. And we also had to rely more heavily on US ports because of this strike. One of the most harmful aspects of the strike was the unpredictability, particularly when the ILWU resumed picket lines on July 18th. On July 19th, Canpotex announced we were withdrawing all new sales offers around the world because of the supply chain uncertainty at the Port of Vancouver. This is a step Canpotex has never done before in our 51-year history. Our inability to move potash created congestion at our shareholders' mines. This resulted in Nutrien announcing it was curtailing production at their Rocanville and Cory mines here in Saskatchewan. And you might ask, why does this matter? Why is this important? As you've heard this morning, reliability is critical, and to potash customers overseas, and for very importantly, global food security. Potash shipments are time sensitive. A missed potash shipment can mean potash doesn't get to a farmer's field, hurting food production. And reliability is critical to Canada's brand overseas, and it has been built over decades by exporters like Canpotex for 51 years. Reliability is an important part of our brand as Canadians and potash producers, but also our competitive advantage. For example, last year, Canpotex shipped record volumes to Bangladesh, backfilling potash traditionally sourced from Russia. In March, the federal government proudly highlighted the agreement for Canpotex potash between the Canadian Commercial Corporation and the government of Bangladesh. Bangladesh could trust Canpotex would be a reliable and a stable partner. We're proud to have stepped up in light of potash supply concerns stemming from Russia's illegal invasion of the Ukraine. We can't take this brand for reliability for granted. In just the last 2 years, we've experienced floods, wildfires, poor winter rail performance, numerous labor disruptions, including last month's strike at the St. Lawrence Seaway. All of these disruptions are adding up and risk chipping away at our strong Canadian reputation. Canpotex is doing what we can to protect our hard-earned reputation. I can say that we've invested approximately $3 billion over the past 2 decades into our own supply chain, including building our own rail cars, operating our own terminals on both East and West Coasts, and chartering our own vessels. The rest of the world is noticing, and I do not want competitors taking advantages of Canada's supply chain uncertainty. To be absolutely clear, our competitors from Russia and Belarus are at their near traditional levels of exports, potash exports, pre-sanction or pre-Ukraine war. I have one quick sobering example for you. Indonesia is the world's 5th largest potash consumer, and potash is the largest Canadian export to that country. Earlier this month, the fertilizer press noted and reported that the impact of the Port of Vancouver strike had on Canadian potash exports to Indonesia. Specifically, Indonesian importers took on more potash from Russia. Russia replaced Canada as their leading potash supplier in September as a direct result of this strike.
Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. McKenzie. Yes. Time is very tight today. Can I go on to Ms. Anderson from the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, please, for 5 minutes? Yes.
Est-ce qu'on pourrait réduire un petit peu? Est-ce qu'on pourrait réduire l'introduction?
Could we perhaps shorten the introductions a little bit? Perhaps we could shorten the introductions so that we have time to hear the witness fully.
Yes, well, she has a full 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, please go ahead, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. As mentioned, I'm Bridget Anderson, the President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, and I'm presenting today from the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. On behalf of our members of over 5,000 businesses, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the significant economic impacts of the 13-day strike this summer at Canada's West Coast ports. This strike, the longest in almost 4 decades, unfolded against the backdrop of years of challenges in the supply chain, largely outside of our control. The accumulation of these events impacted Canada's image and role as a stable partner in the global supply chain. In March of 2020, the pandemic's effects began a tidal wave of imbalances in container trade as factories around the world shut down, leading to shortages, scarcity, and hoarding. In July of 2021, wildfires damaged rail lines and brought train shipments to a grinding halt. In November of 2021, an atmospheric river caused billions of dollars of economic damage to 2 Class 1 rail links and highway systems, which were heroically rebuilt. These events highlight the extreme pressure that fueled inflation and caused economic stress, some of which we were able to control and others we could not. We know that we need to build climate resiliency into our supply chain, and our members are investing to do just that. These investments in our resiliency and growth will mean good, paying, and often union jobs. Against this backdrop, we were concerned in the months leading up to July 1st about what the short and long-term economic harm of a strike at the ports of Vancouver and Prince Rupert could be. And we communicated that to government and port-reliant industries about the damage that could occur if a strike shut down the ports. Regrettably, those fears came to fruition with a coast-wide strike on Canada Day. During the strike, we launched a port shutdown calculator, a tool designed to visually depict the magnitude of trade disruption. The numbers were staggering, with $800 million worth of trade being disrupted each day. Our calculator estimated the total economic impact of the strike to be a remarkable $10.7 billion. This disruption reverberated across critical sectors nationwide, from manufacturing and retail to agriculture, energy, and automotive dealers. Small businesses ran out of building and construction materials needed to build critically needed homes. Local car dealers were awaiting shipments of vehicles and parts. Exporting industries lost their ability to move their products to market, making it more difficult to secure the global contracts that drive investment and employ Canadians. Pulp mills stood silent, mining operations were curtailed, and businesses across Canada faced increased costs and prolonged wait time for goods. Moreover, the rerouting of goods destined for Canada to alternative ports not only incurred additional costs and delays for businesses, but also needlessly amplified the environmental footprint of our trade. And while the strike unfolded in BC, the effects were felt nationwide. We think of the Port of Vancouver as Canada's port, for it moves as much goods as the next 5 largest ports combined, single-handedly accounting for approximately 25% of Canada's total traded goods, which means that long-term disputes like the one experienced this summer have far-reaching impacts that affect the entire nation. Billions of dollars of goods bypassed Vancouver for other ports, especially Seattle, Tacoma, and other U.S. and Mexican ports, as port swaps and diversions increased. All of this cost Canada. Businesses were unable to adequately plan their operations and staffing without knowing if the ports would be open from one minute to the next, made worse by the back to forth with strike action. Throughout this strike and its aftermath, we consistently urged the federal government to explore additional tools to facilitate lasting agreements during labor disruptions that affect the entire economy. The review initiated by the Minister of Labour under Section 106 of the Canada Labour Code is a key opportunity to do this. In conclusion, I thank you once again for the opportunity to share insights into the impact of the strike, and we look forward to collaborating with the government to ensure that meaningful collective bargaining can take place without causing detrimental nationwide consequences to our economy and to our reputation as a reliable, stable trading partner. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our witnesses. We very much appreciate getting your comments on the record. Mr. Martel?
Oui, Madame Chair, vu des inconvénients d'aujourd'hui, est-ce qu'on peut demander aux témoins de revenir?
The inconvenience of today, could we perhaps ask our witnesses to come back? They have prepared, they have made the necessary efforts, and now they don't have the opportunity to answer questions. Would it be possible for them to come back?
clerk to extend that invitation if it works within the schedule that we've planned. If there's any particular questions I think that the committee wants to ask, possibly you could communicate directly with the witnesses and get that information as well. But we'll certainly see if there's an opportunity to invite them back. All right, from that perspective. So, all right. Mr. Baldinelli,
Well,
we
at
got
a minimum,
31 seconds.
has the clerk received written submissions that can be shared as well? At a minimum. But given that, I mean, we have extended these offers to these important stakeholders to make presentations. I would have appreciated an opportunity to ask questions. So if we can at least have that ability to see if they can return, that would be greatly appreciated.
It says to all of the witnesses present and camera, if you could submit in writing any additional comments or areas you want to reiterate to the clerk, and she will distribute it to all of the committee members. And again, our apologies, okay?
J'ai une question. Peux-tu juste une question?
I can't.
Une question?
It's gone beyond 10 seconds. Do I have permission to adjourn the meeting?
Yeah, it's adjourned.
Meeting adjourned. Sorry, it's 9:46.